Hello, everybody, and welcome. Welcome. We're at the top of the hour, and so please make your way in. Find seats at the front. Don't be a stranger. My name's Greg here. I'll be the moderator. I'm the head of marketing here at Switch, and we'll just get started in like probably 20 seconds. But in those 20 seconds, we'd love for you to write in the chat on the right-hand side where you're coming from, anything, something just to say hi. And I'd love to see who the first person is that gets to say hi on the chat because I'd love to welcome them. Who's it going to be? David, welcome. Welcome to the conversation. Thanks for being here. Yes, this is interactive forum. So that chat is your friend and confidant. So if you have a question at any point in the conversation, use the chat. Use the chat, any questions you have, and either if we don't get to it during the presentation, we've got time at the end for Q&A, and we'll make sure we get to it. So I will be on the chat for the presentation. I will be there chatting with those, and then I'll come back to ask those questions to the panelists. And so, yeah, without further ado, we're at 101, a perfect time to start this thing. I'm going to kick this off to Jeremy, who's going to start this off. So without further ado, Jeremy, over to you.
Thank you, Greg. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm Jeremy, Director of Real Estate Partnerships here at Switch. It's really my role in the organization to work with developers and owners and operators of real estate to kind of help them with this whole EV charging strategy. It's a big task, and we just try and make it as easy as possible for some of these groups. So over to Jason.
Hi, my name is Jason Goldfarb, and I'm a partner with the law firm Falcon Rappaport and Berkman, and I head up and manage a firm's real estate infrastructure practice. And we place a very heavy emphasis on EV charging and EV charging infrastructure. I've been in the infrastructure business for about 20 plus years, and I've worked as an attorney, as an asset manager, project manager for investors in infrastructure. And I've been featured in a couple of different news outlets and on several different podcasts and other webinars. And for those of you who have not followed me yet on LinkedIn, I would encourage you to do that. Of everybody that's here on this webinar, you're going to get a lot of really good information from the crew that's here today. And thanks for joining us.
Great. Lorelei?
My name is Lorelei Sylvia, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Tower Title. And we are a title insurance company that is exclusively focused on providing title services for the energy and infrastructure sectors, which is really important to have that focus because it allows us to make sure that we really hone in on the nuances of these transactions, and there are a lot of them. So it's really helps us a lot to have that focus.
Great. Okay, everyone. So a little bit of our agenda today, we'll talk about EV charging as a macro whole. We'll have Jason speak a little bit about the legality of the EV charging industry and what you can look for through your contracts and your sites. And Lorelei will end it off with title and how to best support that. So EV charging. A little bit about Switch and the organization that I represent. We have over 15,000 chargers out there on the Switch network with a remarkable uptime of 97.5%. We're very fortunate, a ton of beautiful groups, large groups that are really trying to get a handle on the EV charging strategy as a whole. Trust us with this because it's no easy task. You guys see it in the news, you see EV cars coming out more and more, and how do we best support their infrastructure and what they're looking to provide, for their assets. So I pose a couple of questions here throughout the just throughout the webinar. I think it makes most sense of things that I hear the most and basically how that can be applied to wherever you are in your EV charging journey. Because I know a bunch of the attendees are in different stages of this. So one of the questions I often get are, what type of chargers are available and what do I need? So I wanted to just do a high level overview of the different level chargers because there are some on this call that may not know. So a level 1 charger is really used for a single family environment. You have your own dedicated garage, you have your own dedicated outlet, you come home from work, you plug in, no one's bothering you. Longer charge times, 24 hours-ish for a full charge. We joke, it's called a trickle charge. And if you're fortunate to have your own garage and a single family environment, this is perfect because you can always plug in and plug out whenever need be. The level 2 chargers, perfect for multifamily setting, commercial setting, anywhere where these dwell times are about 4 to 6 hours. We deploy a lot of these in our business, and they're perfect. People are coming home from work, they're charging up, let's say 5 or 6 at night. By the time they wake up the next morning, they go to work, they have a full charge. Same situation if you go to your office environment, you plug in at 9 a.m. By the time you're leaving at 5 p.m., you have a full charge. And then there's the level 3, also known as the TCF. You'd find a lot of these along major US highways, retail corridors, and here you could see it in a parking garage. A lot of times these are fast chargers, so you're getting a charge between, let's say, 15 to 30 minutes, and you're in and you're out. Large devices, large to deploy. So another question I typically get are, how many chargers can I install? And that is very nuanced. Each building is totally different. So what I would recommend is align yourself with a great electrical group, whether it's an electrician, electrical contractor, those that have deep knowledge in installing EV chargers. It's vital because the first thing they're going to do is they're going to assess their electrical capacity, and then we're going to start road mapping as to how many you can actually deploy based on the electric at the building. So one of the biggest things in this whole component is budget. It's money, it's money, it's money. And how do you best deploy these using existing capital or trying to reduce capital? So when you're looking at it as a whole, different groups look at this totally differently. There are some that say we need a payback. You know, we're going to sink these assets into the ground. We want to make sure we're getting paid back. You have other groups that are looking at it as a marketing play. You know, if I put these chargers in, will I retain a certain type of tenant and attract a certain type of tenant that is looking to charge their car and live in these buildings? Some aren't so concerned about that. They want to just give it to their tenants. They want to use it as a tenant retention tool. Absolutely admire that. And then the CapEx, you know, the CapEx is the most expensive part of this journey. It is the wiring, the conduit, the boring, the bollards, compared to the actual EV charger and the software that goes into it. And lastly, what I do a lot of is navigating different incentives and rebates and credits that are available for these said groups to take off some of that monetary burden. And we'll get into that in a little bit. So the EV charging landscape as a whole, I break out into 4 different sections. You have the EV chargers and the infrastructures, what I spoke about a little bit before. We're going to speak a little bit about the management and the software aspect. It's what making these chargers smart, and you want to have a full handle on what's going on with the chargers. The next is the EV driver experience. You want to make it seamless for any EV driver to come up, initiate a charge, have a full charge, and drive away and just charge them. Simple as that. And lastly, the O&M support. You want to make sure that these chargers are always monitored 365 days, 7 days a week. And if and when something were to break, you have that support and someone can go out on site and fix it. So a little bit about the journey as a whole. I spent some time on the chargers. You could see one of our chargers deployed here. I believe there's a multifamily setting. We'll get into a little bit of the electrical, the internet, and the software to make these chargers totally operable. So as I said before, it's vital to align yourself with an electrician, electrical contractor who knows how to install these chargers, because they're going to be pulling that available electric off of this house panel. And this is just a great snapshot of one of our deployments. You can see the charger up against the wall in a garage setting. Here we zoned in on the internet. So the internet is vital because we create these little hubs so that way we can monitor the chargers. And it's really vital because we need to know if these are online, if the chargers are speaking to each other, if anything goes wrong, can we remote diagnostic in? And we just create this little hub so it's separate from everything else that's going on at the building level. And then the software, absolutely vital in this day and age. These chargers are now smart. They are no longer just an outlet, which we joke is called a dumb charger. These are smart chargers now. And if you're an owner or operator of real estate, you have full insight into the dashboard now. So you can see where all of your chargers are deployed, across what asset, how much revenue they're producing, how much GHG savings, greenhouse gas emissions, you are omitting from the environment. And a lot of times you need to report this back to the utilities. So let the software do everything for you. It's what makes them smart. So I want to go a little bit more into the software because here are some common questions that I typically get and I wanted to share with you. So who can have access to these chargers? You guys can decide if you want them in a shared environment, a private environment, a public environment, a little bit of everything. How much revenue you've made. Again, no one's getting rich off of these chargers, but it's great to know that they are producing revenue. And what it comes down to at the end of the day is the utilization. The more people drive electric, the more they're going to plug in, the more revenue you're going to produce. How do the drivers pay for the electricity? It's beautiful. It's your electricity. Charge them what you want them to be charged for and let SWTCH retain the revenue and remit it back to ownership. That's what the software does. What if a driver leaves their car in the same spot for a while? Enforce loitering. This is becoming very large in the industry. If I joke, is hogging the charger, you should charge them for hogging the charger and encourage them to get off the charger for the next person available. And again, what if something breaks? That is what the software is doing. It is remote diagnosticing in. Majority of the time, we can handle that all remotely. And in some instances, you might need to bring someone out on site to fix something should there be acts of God. So last, as I start to wrap up my section, I wanted to share the incredible incentives and rebates that are available out there. So the US as a whole, very bullish on what's going on in encouraging EV driving and also charger deployments. So here, level 2 is what I was speaking about a little bit earlier, typically found in multifamily and commercial environments. You can see so many states are so bullish on making this happen. And California, the wide leader, they've been for a number of years, but there are over 250 active level 2 programs. So if you're an owner and operator of real estate, take the money while it's there because eventually the well will run dry. Again, if you're in the level 3 or the DCFC arena, there are still over 150 active incentives and rebates that are out there to encourage the deployment of these types of chargers. And again, don't go at it alone. Happy to help in any way because there's so many nuances to this. And the last thing I wanted to share is what's also called as the Alternative Fuel Vehicle Refueling Property Tax Credit, an absolute mouthful, but also known as the 30C. And the 30C is a federal credit, gives you up to 30% off your taxes, up to $100,000 on a specific site. And not every site qualifies for this. We've zoomed in a little bit, on the right to see the different census tracts. So it all depends on what zip code you're in. It's a per project basis. And again, happy to help just kind of identify and see where these projects might be a best fit. Again, a lot to digest, but we're here to help every step of the way. We do it every day. So with that said, I'm going to hand it back over to Jason to talk about the legal aspect of EV charging. Jason.
Okay, Jeremy, thank you very much. Okay, so I'm just going to do very quick. We do this disclaimer. This is really for general information only, and no attorney-client relationship. Nobody should be taking any legal advice from this. And you'll see some links and connections here, but it's really only for informational and educational purposes. No endorsements of any businesses, companies, or any products. Now that we got the legal stuff out of the way, we can go on to the next slide. So I give a little bit about my background and my experience and what our firm does in this area at the beginning of this. So in the interest of time, so that way we can dive into some of the information here. After this is all done, if you want to look a little bit further, connect with me on LinkedIn or check me out on our firm website. You can find out more about my background and experience and our infrastructure practice. Okay, let's go to the next slide. All right, so I like to use this set of examples here because there are a lot of what I would call dumb deployments out there, and those things kind of tell you the stories of what not to do as you go down this process. I'm not going to go through all of these, but just to give you some of these examples and some food for thought, but No pun intended there. So if you think about this and the different type of chargers that Jeremy just explained, to give you an idea of the differences between the level 1s, 2s, and 3s. So the level 1s are your trickle chargers. The 2s charge up a little bit faster, but they still take, a couple of hours to fully charge your car. And then you have level 3s, which can charge up your car in a very short period of time, could be as little as 20 minutes or a half hour, depending upon power capacity and the vehicle that you're driving. So if a fast food company were to place something like a level 2 charger in a drive-through, that's not exactly the right type of infrastructure to match your use case. Because if you think about the amount of time that anybody, frankly, is spending in a drive-through at any type of fast food place, they're generally not going to be there for more than a few minutes at a time. They're coming in, they're placing their order, they're going to the window, they're getting their order from the window, and then they're gone. So almost any type of charger that you could put in there, even a level 3, would be somewhat pointless in a drive-through. It just doesn't make any sense to put something like that in there. Second example that I'd like to give is somewhat similar to that, but if you're dealing with level 2 chargers and an airport ride pickup lane. This is an actual example of something that I've actually seen in an airport. I've been doing a lot of traveling lately, and if anybody has ever taken an Uber or a Lyft any place from an airport, even from your home, wherever you may be, in the app, it tells you that the driver will wait for you 2 minutes, maybe 5 minutes. And within 5 minutes or less, if you don't show up, where does the driver go? They leave. Now, the reason I'm giving you the example of the chargers in the airport rideshare pickup lane versus the drive-through, that also doesn't make very much sense, because how many rideshare drivers are going to sit there for more than 5 minutes? The answer is 0. But yet I've seen level 2 chargers in the pickup lane at an airport. That doesn't really make any sense. Then you have chargers that can be found in the middle of nowhere. People have probably seen pictures of this, especially at the beginning when chargers were first going out and being deployed. And you see a charger on a lonely highway, and then you see nothing else for miles around. Now, what type of charger that is, I don't know. It almost doesn't really make a difference what it is, unless that location where they put it is, let's say, somewhat equidistant between two major locations. Let's say a downtown area and a residential area. And that charger is now in the middle of a highway. It might make sense to have a level 3 charger there. Why? Because that could hypothetically be a major mobility corridor. It would be a place where people are going long distances, traveling at high speeds, and would need to stop somewhere along the way where it makes sense and where there's sufficient power to have an L3 in that place. But in the middle of nowhere where there's no one else around, doesn't make any sense. Two other examples that I'd like to give also. One is what I call multifamily madness. This is not a problem as far as I know with Switch, but I have seen this happen. And the example that I like to give is that I know of somebody that lives in a building where there are 5 chargers. They are only in the indoor parking garage where you have to pay more money to park to begin with. And most of the time, only 2 of them are working. And so in addition to the fact that there's generally only 2 of them working, you also have a situation where you have people who don't have EVs are parking in the spots, or people who do have EVs are parking there for extended periods of time. As Jerry mentioned earlier, right? You want to incentivize them not to leave their cars there or to move. And what ends up happening is you have complete pandemonium, because everybody that's in the building and needs a charger is never able to use it when they need it. Nobody moves their cars. Everybody in the building is fighting over it. And on top of that, the people who can't afford to pay inside are parking in the outdoor parking lot, but the building hasn't installed any chargers in the outdoor parking lot, which means if you're putting in a charger for your residents, and most of your residents who have EVs can't use them, you have a little bit of a problem. And then last but not least, my other favorite example is a gas station adjacent to a housing development. I think everybody can think of a reason why it would make sense for there to be a gas station near where you live. I have a gas station that's only a couple of blocks away from where I live. I live in a suburban area. It makes perfect sense to have a gas station a few blocks outside of where all the homes are. That makes perfect sense. But it does not necessarily make perfect sense to put an EV charger in that location. Why? Because as Jeremy mentioned, most people that have homes and have their own garages, where are they charging? They're charging up at home. So It doesn't make sense to put an EV charger in that particular location, but it makes a lot more sense for you to have something, let's say, near the highway. I live 20 minutes away from the highway. It could be that you forgot to charge up at night, or you're coming back from a long trip. If you're not sure if you're going to be able to make it home, or on your way to wherever your destination is, it might make more sense for there to be a level 3 charger in that particular location. The bottom line is that you want to be able to match the type of equipment that you're using to the use case at the particular location where you're thinking to deploy this. Okay, we can go to the next slide. All right, so the next thing that I wanted to talk about briefly, and this is where we start to get into what's in your contracts, what's in your policies. One of the things that you need to sit down and think about is your use case and the type of equipment that you're going to be using at your location, and how people are going to be using the EV charging. Once you know all of that information, you can figure out how do you handle pricing. I think I saw a question here in the chat about, can I make money from this? And the answer is, of course, you can make money from it, but it all depends upon how you set everything up. Can I charge idle fees? Of course you can, but that's up to you. You have to make that decision about whether or not you want to do it. The bottom line is you want to be able to maximize the time and the utilization at a particular charger. So how does this get into contracts? So let's go back to the example of multifamily madness. If you have an agreement, let's say, with your residents, you have an agreement, let's say, with the charging company that's providing you with the chargers, and your business deal with the charge company is that they're going to share the revenue with you. If you want to maximize the amount of revenue that you are getting out of those chargers, and if the charging company wants to maximize the amount of revenue that they're getting out of those chargers, you can't allow people to sit there longer than they're supposed to. So you have to have something in the contract with, let's say, your tenants or your residents or your customers, and also something with the charging company to make sure that you have language in there that will maximize time and utilization. What you really want to do is you want to encourage the desired customer behavior, and you want to avoid unintended consequences. And especially if, let's say, somebody is constantly abusing the privilege. So let's go for the example of somebody parking in an EV charging space and they're not supposed to be there because they don't have an EV, but they regularly park in that spot because it's convenient for them in terms of entering and exiting the building. If you don't have a policy in place to ticket them, if you don't have a policy in place to hit them with a fee, if you don't have a policy in place to tow them, that person is going to continue to park in the spot that they're not supposed to be parking in. And on top of that, if you do have those policies in place, or you do have something in your contracts and you don't actually enforce it, then you're going to end up with a contract that essentially has no teeth. So even though you tell people, if you overstay your welcome, you'll be towed, but if you never tow anybody, what's going to happen? Everybody will continue to park in that spot. Okay, we can go on to the next slide. So to my earlier comment, what you want to end up doing is you want to utilize your contracts really to incentivize accountability. So when it comes to things like default, when it comes to things like maintenance, repairs, who is going to be available? So let's say a charger breaks down. Who's going to come and fix it? Whose responsibility is that going to be? Is it going to be the charging company's responsibility? Is that going to be your responsibility as the owner of the property? Are there going to be parts made available to you as the owner of the property? Maybe there are simple parts that can be replaced and repaired without the need to ship a part that might not necessarily be available, or for more serious problems, if you need to send out a truck. But if you don't have a maintenance window, for example, inside your contract that says that if this type of problem happens, we're going to repair it within X amount of hours, that's problem number one. And if you have that, but if you don't have anything, let's say, negative that happens to the repair company, if they don't do the repair on time, then they're just going to let the maintenance kind of fall by the wayside. In other words, you have to have language in there that properly incentivizes them to do their maintenance, do their repairs. It needs to be very clear who is going to be available. Another example that I can give you was on my list earlier about hotels. So one situation that I got involved in peripherally is you had a hotel, you had guests at the hotel, they were trying to charge up, the chargers that they needed weren't working, they didn't know what to do. There was no sign on the charger, you had no idea who to contact, even if there was the name of the company, it wasn't clear how to find them online. So what the guests did is they went inside and they went to the front desk. And then the front desk says, I don't know, you got to call the charging company. They said, well, there's no number on the thing, who do we call? They said, I don't know who to call. Or another situation where they actually did know who to call, but then nobody came to actually do anything, and they told the guest you'll have to wait 48 hours for a repair. Now, if you're a guest and you have a meeting or you have somewhere important to go, let's say you're returning to the airport, you don't have time to wait 48 hours for somebody to come. So you need to put those things into the contract. Who's going to be available? Who's responsible for what? Time to resolve those issues. And you really want to have contract language that's going to disincentivize bad behavior and incentivize good behavior and accountability. Okay, the next slide. Okay, so I'm only going to talk about this very briefly because Lorelei is really going to attack this. So when we talk about title, survey, photo simulations, and physical site inspections, you have to remember that when you are deploying or you're considering deploying EV charging equipment on your property, it is a real estate infrastructure asset. In a lot of ways, it's not that much different than if somebody came and wanted to put, let's say, a cell phone tower on your property, or wanted to put a billboard on your property, or wanted to do solar or wind. You choose. But it is a real estate infrastructure asset. And anytime that you put something down on a piece of real estate, there are a couple of things that you really always have to do. You really have to do your due diligence and you have to do your homework. Title. I love this line. If you recognize the movie that it came from, you're probably dating yourself a little bit like me, but it is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. And until you actually see a title report, and Lorelei and I have come across this multiple times, you're not actually going to know what the situation is on your property or on the property where you're considering doing your deployment, even if it's not your property. And you really need to know what you're getting yourself into. Are there judgments on the property? Are there liens on the property? Is there an easement where you want to put it? Are you actually putting it in the right place? Surveys. So let's talk about surveys. A survey is going to give you a visual depiction and description of the property itself, where everything goes, what it looks like. And to the example that I just gave you, if you're trying to figure out, can I put the charger here, or am I actually putting it in the right place? The survey is going to help you figure it out. Because in combination with the legal documents and things that will come up in a title search and the depiction that's going to be done by a surveyor, you'll know that your infrastructure is going in the exact spot. Last but not least, there's two other items here which are also important. Number one, you always want to do photo simulations. You want to see a visual representation of what it's going to look like. So it's not enough to look at it from a top-down view and see where it's going to be, because a lot of times a photo simulation will show you things that you didn't otherwise notice. Likewise, a physical site inspection will also do the same thing. It could be that the location that you picked is perfect. It's on the right property. It belongs in the right spot. There's no other easement that's going there. But if you didn't do a photo simulation or do a physical site inspection, you wouldn't realize that when you actually get there, that the place where you need to access the cable to charge up your car is actually blocked by something, like a dumpster that somebody happened to put there and hasn't moved for the last 6 months. Those are things that you really need to really be paying careful attention to. So that physical site inspection will verify what you see in a title report, also what comes up in a survey, and also what comes up in the photo simulations. Okay, you can go to the next slide. All right, so I'm just going to give you one really quick example, because just to give you in the interest of time here, this is all really important. If you get nothing else out of the due diligence piece of this, the one thing that I want you to get and understand is that it is literally more efficient and cost effective to spend some money up front doing your homework and doing all of these things than to try to extract yourself from the mess after the fact. Lorelei will give you some really horrible examples, if I'm not mistaken, but when she gets to that, you'll understand. The getting landlocked piece, this is one of my favorite. I know of not Switch, again, I know of another EV charging company that deployed a set of EV chargers in a particular location, and they spent 1.5 years doing this, a small fortune, doing zoning, permitting, getting all the permissions, and so on and so forth. They put their chargers down, and within a very short period of time of deploying the chargers, their next door neighbor decided they didn't like them. And then the next door neighbor put up a fence. And once the neighbor put up the fence, it was impossible to access the chargers because they were literally landlocked. It was the neighbor's property. The neighbor had the right to put up the fence. The problem is that the charging company didn't do their due diligence. They didn't realize by looking at a survey or by looking at a legal description that they were actually completely stuck and surrounded by other properties. So in that instance, what they needed to do is to secure some type of an easement arrangement with the neighboring property, or if the neighbor decided that they weren't going to allow them to do it because they didn't like the EV chargers, they should have picked another place to go where they didn't have this problem. And once you get landlocked and now you have a situation like this, you can be out a small fortune in development costs. And if they would have spent a little bit of money up front on a title report, on a survey, on some photo simulations, maybe actually going there and physically walking the site and the location, they probably would have figured this all out. Okay, I think that might be my last slide. Oh, one more. Okay, we already kind of talked on this, so I'm not going to go through this. I'm going to let Lorelei pick up here. But the main thing that I want you to get out of this and why I went through this list is just to understand that every single use case you're going to come up with is going to be something different. Just because you may have two pieces of property on a street, one could be literally across the street from the other, it doesn't mean that you're going to do your deployment exactly the same way across the street, because the single family is going to be done different than a multifamily, different than a parking lot, different than a suburban area. And by the way, if you are across the street, you can be in a different state, you can be in a different county, you could be subject to different rules and regulations. And if you go back to the map that Jeremy showed you in terms of 30C, it gets really, really granular. You can get 30C can be available to you on one street, but if you literally go to the next block or midway down the street, you might not get that because in that spot, that's where the cutoff line is. So you always have to match your infrastructure to your use case and to keep in mind that every single deployment you're ever going to do is going to be different. And once you do that, you can also set your contracts up in a way so that you have the right equipment going into the right place. Go back to the example that I gave you of the level 2s in the rideshare pickup lane. Didn't belong there, but they had a contract for that. They put that stuff there, completely useless. Nobody will ever use it. You don't want to get yourself into that. It's not good for the charging company. It's not good for the airport. It's not good for the rideshare drivers. It's just not good for anybody. And the reason why those things happened is because people did not pay attention to what they were doing. They weren't reading their contracts, and they weren't understanding what they were getting themselves into. So that's it. The bottom line is that avoiding drama is possible. You do a little bit of homework, you do your due diligence, and you think about this as you would any other type of real estate project that you would embark on. Just because this is a charger doesn't mean that you should be looking at this any differently than if you were thinking of building a shopping center or putting up a multifamily residence. You have to go through the same mechanics and do your homework. Okay, that's it for me.
Thanks, Jason. Over to Lorelei.
Thank you, Jeremy. So as I mentioned originally, I am the COO of Tower Title. And what we do is we focus exclusively on these types of transactions. And that is that when we're dealing with transactions like this, it's really important because of the fact that we there are so many nuances. I think both Jeremy and Jason alluded to all of the variations that you can have when you're installing these chargers. And like Jason said, title is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. There are so many variations in properties and documents and how everything is structured and put together. It's really important to be able to really hone in on those nuances and make sure that the product that we're providing is right in line with what is actually happening on the property. So some of you may be familiar with title policies based on your purchase of the property. And at that point, when the title was run for you to purchase the property, what was being focused on was purchasing the property to live in, to have it as a multifamily, things along those lines. But nobody was focusing on what type of limitations and restrictions might be on that property that would impact your ability to put a potentially commercial feature on that property, a infrastructure piece that was not there before and nobody was worried about. So why do we need to run title for an EV install? It covers the intended use of the land for the EV installation. And that is, at the end of the day, what you're doing and what you need to make sure that you're protecting. And it protects against claims. In the event that the installation is challenged by a third party, a claim can be filed under that policy. When that claim is filed, the underwriter hires an attorney, and that attorney defends the claim for the installer if you're granting an interest on the property. It will also protect the property owner if you're financing directly. So it really is important to make sure that you're protecting yourself, because not only valid claims are a problem. If a frivolous lawsuit is filed because somebody just doesn't really quite like what you're doing, that is also something that would be covered in the policy, and that attorney would defend that claim as well. At the end of the day, what it is it's peace of mind. If an issue arises, you know that you're not going to have to deal with it. Just like any other insurance policy, if you hope that you never have to use it, but if you do, you're glad that it's there. Next slide, please. Okay, so how does the title process work? When we search a property, we review all of the documents that have been recorded against that property, and we verify that we are able to use the property in the way that that we're intending. So here we're able to actually put those charges on the property without any limitations or restrictions, anything that might stop us from using it the way we want to use it. So we review a number of documents, not just recorded documents, but also unrecorded documents. One of those things that we ask for when we're reviewing title is the operational documents for any organization. And so when you went to go purchase your multifamily property, I'm sure most people probably got a very good piece of advice. Don't purchase it in your own name. Instead of buying it in your own name, you want to create an LLC, or you want to create a trust or a corporation, something to protect you in case something happens with that property. And you say, oh, that makes a lot of sense. I'm glad you told me that. I'm definitely gonna do that. But you don't exactly know how that works, right? So what do? You Google it. Okay, how do I form an LLC in X state? And usually you come to a very nice page from the Secretary of State, and it gives you just kind of the blueprint of how you form a corporation. You need articles of organization, you need an operating agreement, you need to file some paperwork and pay the money. So you say, okay, well, okay, that makes sense. But I don't really know what an operating agreement is. So you Google again, LLC operating agreement, and you get a nice form. And there's a couple of blanks to fill out, but other than that, there's not a lot of work to do. So that's great. It makes things so nice and easy, right? So you print it out, you fill in the pieces that you need to fill in, you print it, you have it notarized, you put it in a drawer, and you probably don't really think about it again. And now it's been 10 years since you purchased the property. And either you may have forgotten all the details of that, or or you may not have fully looked into all the provisions in the first place. So we want to review those documents to make sure that we know that every single person who has to sign a document to bind the company does sign that document. It's really important. We've definitely seen situations where it was thought that there was only one person who needed to sign, and it turns out there's two people who need to sign, or there's 2/3 of a board that needs to sign. So we make sure that we do our diligence there and really review those documents to make sure that we have all of the information we need, and we can confirm that the document that's being signed is being signed right, so nobody comes back afterwards and says, well, that document's not valid because the right people didn't bind the company. We also review the chain of title, which is basically all of the deeds that have been recorded against the property. And we do that to make sure that company A gives to company B gives to company B, company C gives to company D, the exact same entity or the exact same person is conveying across the board. There are times when we do find a gap in that chain of title, and more often than not, we can find a solution. We can find a reasonable explanation for why there's that gap, like often probate, or we can find that actually a deed was misindexed, and this is why there was the gap, and resolve the issue. At the end of the day, most of the issues that we find can be resolved in some way, shape, or form. It just takes some creative thinking and willingness to find a solution. So anything that you see here that starts to raise some alarm bells, don't even worry about it, because we will figure out some way to make it work and move forward with your build. Mortgages and lien releases. So this is probably one that might be a little bit of a red flag, because most people have a mortgage on their property. I'd say probably about 80% of the properties that we search do have a mortgage on them. But this is really while it's important, it's not necessarily a hindrance to anything. It is something that comes up all the time. And what we'll do is the parties will get together with the lender, and we'll sign a document called subordination, or an SNDA. And what that document does is basically it's an agreement that says if that mortgage were to be foreclosed on, the underlying interest, what we're talking about, is not going to be wiped out. So it's going to survive any foreclosure, and then everybody is secured. So it's really not that big of an issue. We just need to make sure that it is in fact addressed. If it's not addressed, then there are definitely much larger issues that can arise from it. Access to a public right of way, as Jason mentioned, it's never a good situation when you realize that you don't actually have that access that you thought you had. It is every landowner's right to put up a fence, and then all of a sudden you're cut off, and that's not what anybody wants. Perfecting the interest, we want to make sure that we also record that interest in the land records so that it's of public record and everybody knows what has been agreed to. Next slide, please. So what types of issues are we looking for in a title search? Really what we're looking for is adverse restrictions against the use of the land, and specifically the use that we're talking about. So something that would prevent you from putting these EV chargers on your land, from deploying the installation. And that it could be a whole host of different things that can be found in different documents. So we review every document in the search closely to make sure that we don't have any of these provisions. And if we do find them, we carefully review the language to make sure that we know what they're saying, so that we can incorporate it into the build. So residential use restrictions, that's something that may or may not be a problem depending on the nature of the property, depending on the nature of the install. And so we'll review the language of any residential use restrictions that we find in the light of the specific property, how the property is being used, and how the installation is planned. CCR's provisions and condominium declarations, these really kind of fall in the same bucket. They're basically the operational documents that control what can and can't be done when a property is a part of an HOA or a condominium. These documents are definitely ripe with all sorts of different types of provisions that we need to very closely review to make sure that where the installation is not in contradiction of any of them. They can do everything from limit your ability to put a basketball hoop up, paint the color that you want to paint your building, or they could also control the appearance of any alterations you want to do to your property, the materials that can be used. Sometimes they need to have an architectural committee review, sign off on the plans for that improvement. So there really are a lot of items to look at and make sure that we know everything that those documents say so that we can properly plan that installation. There's also very recently been a movement towards right to charge laws across the states. So that is a really positive movement because what they'll basically say is that the condo association or the homeowners association cannot prohibit the installation of EV chargers. But of course, just like everything else, it can vary. Every state has slightly different language, and not every state has enacted these laws. So we need to be aware of these changing laws and make sure that we're interpreting them along with these documents that typically, almost all of them were created before these very recent statutes that are coming into play. And then we also need to worry about no build or exclusive language, as Jason alluded to as well. So the no build language is one of those things that you kind of, you say to yourself, well, I would know if there's somewhere on my property that I can't build. But they can be really sneaky. So one of the most common documents that we see in a title search is a power line easement. I'd say probably 90% of the properties researched have a power line easement found in that search. And people just kind of look at them and say, okay, well, it's a power line easement. It is what it is. But almost all of those easements have no build language in them. So you cannot build a structure within the bounds of that easement. So if your installation is planning to go within that power line easement, you're going to have a problem. So we look very carefully for that language as well to make sure that we're not going to be running afoul of any of that. Okay, so next slide, please. So a survey. Again, as Jason alluded to, surveys are really important in these installations. What we're doing is a specific purpose survey. So it's not a full boundary survey of the entire property, but it is a survey of just the location of the planned installation. And what it will do is it will create a specific legal description that will look like gibberish, but actually says the exact location of where the installation is. And you want this because it's really important to define this location for everybody involved in the transaction. It is, if you're not sure exactly where it is, the number of issues that can arise are really just boundless. So you want to avoid that ambiguity, and you also want to make sure that you're not encroaching outside of the property. The last thing you want after that build is complete is to find out that the installation is 5 feet into your neighbor's property. Nobody wants that kind of a headache. And then you also want to make sure you're not encroaching on any of those restrictions that state that you can't build in a certain location, or exclusive rights you might have already granted to another party, or a predecessor has granted to another party. Next slide, please. Parallels to the telecom industry. So this one is probably my favorite slide because I've been a part of the telecom industry for an extended amount of time. And I've seen kind of this trajectory play out in real life. In the 90s and early 2000s, everybody saw the future. Everybody could see this future of cell phone in every single person's hand. And it was a bright future. So what happened? We had a big influx of developing cell towers. Those cell towers were put pretty much anywhere that they could. There wasn't a lot of diligence that was done. Nobody confirmed who owned the property, what the property lines were. Everybody did ideally want the cell tower as far back in the property as they possibly could get it. So, they were built on lot lines, but maybe it wasn't the right lot line. And slowly but surely, issues started piling up. Litigation from a neighbor saying, oh, actually, you built a tower on my property, completely on my property. It's not on this guy's property at all. Or an issue where, as it turns out, the person that you dealt with didn't own the entire property. They owned 50% of the property. And now 5 years later, you have somebody coming and saying, well, I need my share of the rent for the last 5 years. Or, you didn't own the property at all, as it turns out. So as all of these things started piling up, everybody in the industry realized that, it is far harder to fix a problem than to avoid creating it in the first place. So my final statement is to avoid, if you don't learn from the past, you're doomed to repeat it. And I think that it's something that everybody who's interested in the EV industry should absolutely take heed of.
Was fierce. That was fantastic. That was a lot of wonderful content. Thank you guys so much for sharing. We've got a bunch of questions in the chat, and so I'm just going to go through some. There's some really good ones. We might not get to all of them, but let's just start. One near the end that I really found was intriguing. Nicole asked, I saw draft right to charge language that would require residential and commercial tenants to carry 1 million of general liability insurance. I'm interested in the esteemed panel's thoughts on that. It feels prohibitive to me. I don't need a policy to install a dryer at my rental. Isn't an EV charger an appliance at the end of the day?
Yeah, it's a fabulous question, and this is something that's been coming up a lot. This is actually one of the more common questions that I've been getting, is in terms of the amount of liability insurance that you would need. If we go back to the telecom industry and you go back to any of those other types of real estate infrastructure assets, it's quite common to see requirements for policies of that size. For you as the driver of the EV, it's a little bit different. If that's something that you would have to bring up with your auto insurance company, because they're the ones that would really be covering that particular policy, or they would be covering your insurance for your vehicle itself. I think in terms of what you're talking about here, though, if you're just as an individual putting one of these in your house and you're doing a trickle charger, my guess is, although I don't want to say this for sure, because again, you'd have to look at the policies to see what's covered and what's not covered, but that's probably something that's probably covered within your homeowner's policy, or may not be. That's something that you would have to check. If you're looking at, I would say, a large-scale deployment of a lot of chargers, you would be nearly foolish to not have some level of liability insurance for the large number of chargers that you're putting out, no different than if you were deploying any other type of equipment or asset at your property. If you own a multifamily building, of course, you're going to have general liability insurance. If you own a shopping center, of course, you're going to have that. So I don't know exactly what the context was. I see here it says in residential and commercial tenants. It makes more sense in the commercial context because you're going to be required anyway to have that kind of insurance. It does seem like a bit much for a homeowner's policy, but then again, I don't know. You'd have to really take a look at your homeowner's policy, speak with your insurance broker, and find out how that would work exactly. But it's not that off the wall.
Good answer. Good answer. A quick one to just address. Michael asked near the top, what does the Switch Hub provide that an in-house solution such as Unify Ubiquity can't? I did a quick Google of what that was. I hadn't seen it before. Really interesting technology. The short answer is that technology, it's a cloud-based service that brings together a lot of assets from a building. We have a technical team that would be able to give you the nuanced answer, but in short, like our hubs can be connected to larger systems like this one. So that is like the very TLDR, but there's definitely nuances in that, which we'd be happy to connect you to one of our technical people. Continuing to go down, there's one about, this is I guess one for Jeremy. Property owners need to have a development plan to include proper operational oversight. My experience with a number of hotels is that the EV charging works fine and is a great draw for guests when the property integrated with the hotel reservation system and the front desk operations. It's what happens after the install that determines overall success or failure to comment. But I guess in your thoughts, like what is the best approach for like making sure the charging feels integrated to the property?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. You know, you find sometimes in this landscape, the EV charging landscape, and Lorelei and Jason alluded to it earlier, it's the wild, wild west. So I would say align yourself with a credible company, because sometimes we're finding some of these other charging companies who have entered the market. Maybe they just want to sell hardware. Maybe they just want to sell software. Maybe they're trying to figure out both. And what happens is you become a jack of all trades and a master of none. So I would say find the right niche, find the right company, because at the end of the day, whether it be the hotels, whether it be multifamily, these chargers are going to be deployed. They need to be monitored. And at the end of the day, all of that monitoring will be done remotely and then dispatched. If no one is monitoring, a lot of people are just selling chargers. They're planting them in the ground. They're doing it as a land grab. That's not what you should be doing this for. So I would say at the end of the day, align yourself with a good company and make sure this, I alluded to this earlier, it's all about the network. It's all about the software. You need to be able to monitor these. So, you know, shameless plug for Switch is we would integrate this software into other smart building platforms, such as hotel reservation systems, smart building applications, smart parking associations, things like property management systems. So that way it's all integrated and it's kind of that one throat to choke rather than having multiple things. And you're trying to figure out how are you supported in any which way from all of this app fatigue, 1-800 numbers, things of that nature. So I hope I answered that question.
Yeah, we're gonna jump to insurance here. So a question about insurance implications when there's a new EV install. The question is, are insurers adding specific riders for added risk/liability, like fire and collision? I don't personally know what those words all mean stringing together, but I suspect you guys do.
Yeah, again, my guess is that is starting to happen, but a lot of it is also going to be driven by state insurance requirements. Every state's going to probably have some different rules about what needs to be done. And right now we're sort of in this stage where this is so new and everybody's kind of like feeling their way out. We've all used this line before. I think all three of us have used this at some point in time about how it's really like the wild, wild west. There are some places where they really have their act together and they know exactly what they were expecting of everybody. There are other states and other municipalities where they're not so sure. There are places where they're starting to just sort of figure this out. There are places where they're coming up with these ideas of things that they need to do, which might be completely impractical. The example of requiring a homeowner to have $1 million policy when the value of the house might not even be $1 million, like that doesn't really make sense. But it could be that somebody in the legislature said, oh, this will be a great idea. Let's just do this. Let's require it of everybody. So everybody's kind of starting to figure this out. That also comes down to individually, it's going to make a difference. One of the things that I mentioned earlier, and I think all three of us have really tried to point out, is that every place that you're going to be doing something like this, it's literally going to be different. There is no one size fits all for any of this. So there isn't necessarily going to be a one size fits all for what your insurance requirements are going to be, but that would be another part of your due diligence that you would need to do just like anything else. You need to talk to your insurance company, you need to talk to your insurance broker, and you need to find out what are their requirements, what are they going to insist that we need to have, how do we need to handle this in the overall context of the plan of what we're looking to deploy, and what our use case is going to be. So that's something that you would really have to look at individually based on the location and where you're doing this.
Great. Question from Jean-Michel or Michael. Is there certification required on EVSEs for collecting efficient data by kilowatt hour or time? And I know there may be some nuances Canada, US. And then the second question was, does the Switch have an EMS or an energy management system with certification as well?
Yes, absolutely. So the bread and butter of the software is energy management. We have tested this rigorously. We're very fortunate for all the incredible certifications, OCP, ISO, Energy Star. I mean, you name it, we really take this seriously because our core is going into these existing buildings that were built 15, 20 years ago and not thinking about EV charging. So us being able to go in there and deploy using the software, not only to deploy it, but to deploy them at scale, we're very fortunate for that energy management component. We're doing a lot of work with utility companies, obviously MERBs, and just a slew of different environments where this energy management is so, so important.
For MERBs, connectivity can sometimes be an expensive challenge in underground parking where there's no Wi-Fi, Ethernet, or cellular data in place. How do you see this in the future, knowing that more and more MERBs are moving ahead with EV charging?
Yeah, I alluded to this a little bit during my slideshow. You know, one of our best practices would be building out our own little Wi-Fi hub. So instead of relying on necessarily maybe the building's Wi-Fi, maybe having to connect directly to cellular, what we are doing is each time we deploy chargers, let's say it's a garage setting, we are building out our little Wi-Fi hub. We are getting the connectivity from outside. It's getting piped on the inside, and then we are monitoring that way. So we are seeing even deployments go from, let's say, P1 all the way down to P7. And that also allows us to work in the energy management component because it's all being siphoned through the Wi-Fi. These chargers are then speaking to each other, and then they can start distributing energy throughout. So it's one of our bread and butters, and happy to chat about it. I think it was Maxime who asked that. I could take it offline.
Nice. Going up, yeah. So these are some great questions. There's one about competing EV charging locations. So the idea being, should you look at the number of EV chargers in a particular location when factoring right sizing the project for public use? So, you know, if there's a couple in your corner, should you do it or should you not do it? Who wants to give a stab at that?
Yeah, I have some thoughts on this, but I think, Jeremy, from the deployment side, you would probably have some thoughts on this too. One of the things also that you have to be very mindful of is if somebody else is right nearby, you have to really ask yourself from a business standpoint, well, if there's somebody over there, does it make sense for me to go over here? If you don't have enough, if you get back to utilization, if there's not going to be enough traffic, no pun intended, to be able to use, you know, both locations, from a business standpoint, it might not make that much sense. The other thing to think about also is that if you're the owner of the property, and let's say you've now entered into a contract with a charge point company, and let's say you now own another piece of property someplace else, you might have a restriction in your contract that doesn't allow you to bring a competitor onto the property as well. So you have to be mindful of that too. That's something else that you would need to take a look at and see what's in your contract. Typically in the telecom industry, you would have a restriction like that. So they might have language in there, something to the effect of you're not allowed to have anybody else or another competitor come onto the property. You might not be allowed to have a competitor, let's say, come within a radius of the property that you own. You clearly have no control over other people. But let's just give just for purposes of example, if you have a large farm and you put a tower down in one location, they don't want you to turn around tomorrow and go to the competitor and put a charger up right next, a tower right up next to the one that was just built. So that way you can then take away the rent that's coming in in other words, you can't do that kind of stuff. And you might have some restrictions in your contract that might prevent you from doing something like that. The other thing also that I would mention, and I'm sure this is something that Switch does and a lot of other companies that are out there in this business, there are a lot of resources available that provide this information that can tell you how many EVs are in a particular location, where are the other chargers, who owns them, what does utilization look like, so on and so forth. If you look online, there are a bunch of different places that do that. If you looked on LinkedIn, you could find them too. Just by way of example, I happen to know that like AAA does this. They will make that information available to help you figure out where to put your deployment. And there are companies that specifically specialize in helping you figure out if it makes sense to put charging in a particular location, and also helps you kind of take a look at almost like a Google Maps view from like, a 10,000 foot view. You can literally see where everybody else is locating their chargers and who's in control of them. So that will also help you figure out whether or not it makes sense to go in a particular place or not.
Great. We are past time. These have been fantastic questions, but we do need to be respectful of people's time. So we're going to have to say goodbye right now, but this has been recorded. We will send out this via email to everybody, and feel free to reach out to the group here on LinkedIn. We'll include their email in the follow-up email so that you can have your questions answered for some that we didn't get to. But otherwise, thank you so much for being part of this conversation. And yeah, have a great rest of the day. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.